Tonight on segment 2, we continue our special series on Cuba. Although it's just 90 miles off the Florida coast, because of politics, Cuba has been forbidden territory, off limits to most Americans for almost 40 years. In that time, Fidel Castro has remade Cuba. Before he took over in 1959, the literacy rate hovered around 75%. Today, it is 96%. He instituted free universal health care and offered Cubans subsidies for housing and electricity. But Mr. Castro has also jailed or exiled dissidents, artists, and anyone else labeled as antisocial or anti-revolutionary. So after years of revolution and years of hostility, where is Cuba today and where is it headed? Craig Heaps reports from Cuba, the forbidden country.
To a visitor from the United States, Cuba today appears in some ways stuck in the early 1960s. A lot of old cars, jam-packed houses, people struggling to get basic necessities.
We're working at it. It's okay now. It's good. It's pretty good.
Many Cubans seem to have come to that grudging conclusion. We don't have all we want or maybe even need, but we're getting by, and we're working at it. Others are not so sure. The fact is that with the loss of billions of dollars in Soviet aid, times are tough. This man stopped us on the street in Havana to make sure we had an accurate picture of day-to-day life here.
If you're shopping for a pair of shoes, they cost you about 100 pesos, and I myself being a worker at this hotel over there, I'm making 200 Cuban pesos a month. I don't have the luxury of buying myself a pair of shoes.
In a speech to the Communist Party's 5th Congress earlier this month, President Fidel Castro told his followers that some compromises are now necessary. Not to let foreigners take over Cuba as they did in the 1950s, but to invite them to come here with their money. With that in mind, Cuba has refurbished many old hotels, such as the Nacional, built in the 1920s, and geared them heavily toward non-Cuban tourists and business people. It's where we caught up with Canadian Barry Murphy, who sells machine lubricants.
They're not all, card-carrying communists. They're frustrated capitalists who perhaps can't operate under the constraints of the system, but they're making changes here now. They're making it possible to do business.
For 35 years, U.S. law has prohibited most Americans from traveling here. Now, the Helms-Burton Act tightens up the U.S. embargo against Cuba by seeking to punish even non-U.S. companies that trade here. Most people here, whether Cuban or not, think the embargo is wrong.
They shouldn't have a blockade against us. They don't let us do business with other countries, and they shouldn't do that.
They find it quite funny, really. They sort of laugh at the fact of, what you can't get and, what you can do and what you can't do. No one takes... I suppose they see it pretty stupid, really.
I think that maybe the United States has been a little bit hard on Cuba at times, eh?
And while researching this series, I talked to a former Clinton administration advisor who said there is little impetus in either government to make relations more normal. No president seems to want to anger anti-Castro Cubans in Florida, rich as that state is with electoral votes. And Mr. Castro seems to want neither to lose an enemy he can rally his people around, nor to invite any American influence. Americans who come here as tourists do so in defiance of U.S. law, risking fines and imprisonment. Although many come through travel agents in Mexico and Canada, almost no one is ever prosecuted. Gillian Anderson was on vacation from St. Paul, Minnesota. She says the fact the U.S. government said she could not come was reason enough to do so.
It will probably be opened eventually in the next 5 years, and it's more or less, I think, going to be a shame that Americans will come, because they'll take it over like they do everything.
The Cubans actually welcome American tourists, not even stamping their passports, so U.S. immigration has no clue if they've been here. Even a woman who angrily lectured us about U.S. policy welcomed Americans.
What would you like to say to the people of the United States?
To the people to come, to tell Clinton to let them come here and see what goes on in this country.
I think they're human beings. I think that they have nothing to do with the politics of their country. I think they're just like me. I think they want to work, and I think if they came here as tourists, it would be perfect.
You've really got to come to Cuba to see what's really going on with the people here. The imperialists really don't impact us that much.
And those who do come, legally or not, will find people who, even in this time of transition, are still dedicated to the heroes of their revolution, especially to Ernesto Che Guevara, the nation's former interior minister. Since he died in a Bolivian jungle in 1987, Guevara has become an icon to many Cubans. While we were in Havana, we attended a ceremony at a military museum in which those who fought alongside Che unveiled a plaque in his memory. Many younger people here who grew up in the system of Castro's Cuba say they realize more change will come, and they're ready for it. But they also say they have no plans to abandon the revolution of Che and Fidel, a revolution that has shaped their past and that they believe will guide their future. In Havana, Cuba, I'm Craig Heaps, and that's segment 2 for tonight.
Tomorrow night on segment 2, we'll take you to the tourist attractions that bring people to Cuba from all over the world, but which are off limits to Americans. Here's a preview.
The biggest source of dollars here, tourism. Despite the history of mafia-run hotels and casinos that helped set the stage for the revolution, Cuba has once again turned to foreign visitors for hard cash. Last year, almost 1 million foreigners came to Cuban resorts and spent a record $1.3 billion.
We'll have that story tomorrow night right here on the 10 o'clock news.